Hey guys, Mr. Cole here. Wanted to record a quick video going over the last rhetorical analysis essay prompt that you all wrote on. It was the Richard Louv Last Child in the Woods prompt. The feedback that I got from a number of students was that you guys absolutely hated this prompt even more than you hate a typical rhetorical analysis essay prompt. So I thought it was worth looking at and explaining how I would have approached this prompt, giving you a link to a sample essay, and hopefully along the way there will be a couple of things that you can maybe take away and apply to your next rhetorical analysis essay. Whenever we get a rhetorical analysis prompt, we want to begin by kind of attacking the prompt and finding out noticing what information they give us that can help us get started. This one says the passage below is from The Last Child in the Woods, 2008, by Richard Louv. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-developed essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies Louv uses to develop his argument about the separation between people and nature. Support your analysis with specific references to the text. Okay, so they don't give us a ton here, and maybe that's where some of the difficulties came in. We do know, though, that that Last Child in the Woods is a book. It's italicized, so it's a book or a longer work, but most likely a book. If you see a title in quotation marks, that means it's from a shorter work. So something like a letter or a speech or an essay or an article. Be really careful to get the genre right when you're talking about the text in your essay. Call it a passage, right, or call it an excerpt. But I had a number of people calling it an article or an essay, and several people are calling it a novel. And it's not a novel. Novels are fictional, right? So you just want to present yourself in the best way possible by calling the text what it is and being aware of the genre that it is. Next, of course, we're going to be looking for what choices the writer makes and how the writer makes his argument. And then before we can even do that, though, we need to look at the topic, which is a separation between people and nature. We need to figure out what exactly Louv is saying about or is arguing about the separation between people and nature. It's not enough just to parrot or restate the prompt in your thesis. So if your thesis statement said something like, Louv uses strategies X, Y, and Z to argue that people and nature are becoming more and more separated. Okay, that is enough to get the 1 out of 1 thesis point, but you're really setting yourself up for a weak essay if you do that. We need to go further and say, okay, what specifically is he saying about people and nature and how they're becoming separated? And we can make some educated guesses. Like we can probably guess that he's saying that this is not a great thing that people are losing touch with nature. Without reading a word of the prompt, that's kind of an assumption that we can make. And if we're wrong, then we can readjust. But it's a good thing to try to make some predictions before you begin reading. Okay, he begins the passage by saying researchers at the State University of New York at Buffalo are experimenting with a genetic technology through which they can choose the colors that appear on butterfly wings. The announcement of this in 2002 led writer Matt Richtel to conjure a brave new advertising medium. There are countless possibilities for moving ads out of the virtual world and into the real one. Sponsorship-wise, it's time for nature to carry its weight. This is the author speaking again. Advertisers already stamp their messages into the wet sands of public beaches. Cash-strapped municipalities hope corporations agree to affix their company logo on parks in exchange for dollars to keep the public spaces maintained. The sheer popularity of simulating nature or using nature as ad space, quote, demands that we acknowledge, even respect their cultural importance, suggests Richtel. Culturally important, yes, but the logical extension of synthetic nature is the irrelevance of true nature, the certainty that it's not even worth looking at. So right away we begin to get a contrast, right, between the virtual world and the real one, between synthetic nature, which is kind of slowly taking over true nature. He begins by noting a startling study that illustrates how technology and the modern world are interfering with nature. Also note the allusion to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You might not have gotten that reference. Brave New World is a dystopian novel set in the future where nothing is real and everything is kind of synthetic and artificial. But it would have given you a leg up if you had understood that reference, because then you sort of know the author's point right away, which is that this is where we're headed, this Brave New World where nothing is real anymore. By the way, sorry for the aggressive, bold, all caps here for the rhetorical strategies. I want to try to highlight the strategies that I was noticing as I read. Beyond this, he goes to give some examples designed to alarm the audience. These things, the beaches, the parks, now being filled with ads are associated with purity, and they're now being sort of corrupted by commerce. At the end, Loeb makes his argument clear that synthetic nature is overtaking true nature, and it's not good. For the rest of the passage, he contrasts synthetic with true nature. I would not have spent a ton of time if I were writing this essay. I mean, there's not a ton here rhetorically. Like, he's mostly just kind of trying to sort of startle his audience into realizing how bad the situation is getting. From there, he makes the argument a little bit more personal, and I'm going to read this section now. It says, "True, our experience of natural landscape often occurs within an automobile looking out," as Elaine Brooks said. But now, even that visual connection is optional. A friend of mine was shopping for a new luxury car to celebrate her half-century of survival in the material world. She settled on a Mercedes SUV with a global positioning system. Just tap in your destination and the vehicle not only provides a map on the dashboard screen, but talks you there. But she knew where to draw the line. The salesman's jaw dropped when I said I didn't want a backseat television monitor for my daughter, she told me. He almost refused to let me leave the dealership until he could understand why. Rear seat and in-dash multimedia entertainment products, as they are called, are quickly becoming the hottest add-on since rear-view mirror fuzzy dice. The target market? Parents will pay a premium for a little backseat piece. Sales are brisk, the prices are falling. Some systems include wireless infrared connected headsets. The children can watch Sesame Street or play Grand Theft Auto on their PlayStation without bothering the driver. So here again, I said he begins to make his argument more personal. He's got the first person pronouns like our, right? He's connecting with his audience in that way. And he's also, I don't know that I'd call this an extended metaphor, but it's maybe a motif that he develops throughout. He begins talking about cars a lot. From here, a lot of people notice this anecdote. It helps Louvre better connect with his audience. And the way he does that is because this is just a mundane, everyday experience. Many readers had faced this very choice of whether to it's an older audience, right? Many of them have bought cars and had thought, okay, do I need a TV in my back seat, or something similar, if not that specific thing? But they had realized that that technology is becoming increasingly prevalent, right? Um, these examples, the specific examples of Sesame Street and Grand Theft Auto, I thought were noteworthy because they both relate to childhood, which has increasingly become a time not to observe the real world, but to become lost in screens. So, um, basically, this technology is isolating now, right? Whereas people used to have conversations in cars because what else would you do? Now, kids can watch Sesame Street or Grand Theft Auto. And so not only are we becoming separated from nature, but we're becoming separated from human beings as well because of modern technology. So he goes on to say, why do so many Americans say that they want their children to watch less TV, yet continue to expand the opportunities for them to watch it? More important, why do so many people no longer consider the physical world worth watching? The highway's edges may not be postcard perfect, but for a century, children's early understanding of how cities and nature fit together was gained from the back seat. The empty farmhouse at the edge of the subdivision, the variety of architecture here and there, the woods and fields and water beyond the seamy edges, all that was and is still available to the eye. This was the landscape that we watched as children. It was our drive-by movie. So here the author is starting to build some momentum for his case, right? He's got these rhetorical questions. He's being really transparent about his purpose, which is he wants his audience to reflect on their own role in our loss of appreciation for true nature. If you ever see rhetorical questions in a text, it's because the author wants you to stop and think. The author doesn't go on to answer the questions because the purpose is that you stop and slow down and think, right? So here we see also his syntax. There's a parallel structure. There's examples of actually both asyndeton and polysyndeton. So he's kind of getting into a rhythm here. And his syntax coupled with the imagery imitates the act of looking out the window of a moving car. So if you look at this, it's kind of just these images that are sort of fleeting and they pass by really quickly, right? And so that's kind of what it's like to look out a car. You see an empty farmhouse and then it's gone. Then you see different architecture. Then you see some woods and fields. He's, in my opinion, kind of trying to imitate what it's actually like to look outside of a car. And I say now we're onto something because it feels like we're getting a pattern here with this car stuff. And then finally, the metaphor adds to the author's wistful, nostalgic, romantic tone. He also continues to include first-person pronouns to indicate community as opposed to isolation of the modern world. So, back then in the good old days, or whatever you want to say, there was community. Whereas nowadays, the parents are just shoving a video game in their kid's face and saying, "Don't bother me while I'm driving." So here's how it ends. He says, "Perhaps we'll someday tell our grandchildren stories about our version of the 19th century Conestoga wagon." "You did what?" they'll ask. "Yes," we'll say, "it's true. We actually looked out the car window. In our useful boredom, we used our fingers to draw pictures on fogged glass as we watched telephone poles tick by. We saw birds on the wires and combines in the fields. We were fascinated with roadkill, and we counted cows and horses and coyotes and shaving cream signs. We stared with a kind of reverence at the horizon as thunderheads and dancing rain moved with us. We held our little plastic cars against the glass and pretended that they too were racing towards some unknown destination. We considered the past and dreamed of the future and watched it all go by in the blink of an eye." So we've got a hypothetical anecdote here. We've got an oxymoron that sums up what is being lost with our increasing dependence on technology. And I think this is probably the most rhetorically rich section of the text. There's tons of imagery. There's really interesting syntax. You got the we followed by a verb, like stared, we held, we considered. The poetic diction, the continuation of the car extended metaphor, whatever you want to call it, the nostalgic tone. There's some personification, the dancing rain. These are all like little mundane images: coyotes, shaving cream signs. We were fascinated with roadkill. So he's making his point that the kind of magic that you would have when you would look out the car and see these kind of everyday things in nature are just increasingly being taken away as we have more and more technology, and um, the modern world is kind of infringing on that thing that used to be so special to the author. There is so much to talk about in this section, and I say unfortunately too many of us glossed it over because of time. I think this is probably there's the most to talk about in this section, and most people didn't give very much credence, or very much what do you want to say? Didn't spend very much time writing about this section because they ran out of time. So it's a good lesson that you don't always have to give equal weight to the beginning, the middle, and the end of a text in your essay. If I read through this prompt, I might have said, "Wow, he really kind of hits hard at the end here." So I want to spend the most time on this last section here because there's just so much to talk about. And unfortunately, very few had time left, I think, to really give this the amount of time that it deserved. So it's a good lesson there, I think. Moving on, this is the last slide. You guys can't click this here because it's a video, but I'm going to post this Google slideshow and Canvas. There is a link to a sample essay for this prompt that I wrote a few years ago, and I think I probably took more than 40 minutes to write this essay, but and I definitely edited it last night to make it a little bit cleaner. But it's there for you. It's got annotations in the margins. So I would recommend clicking on that, reading it, maybe finding one or two things that you can try to take away from it and apply to your next rhetorical analysis essay. All right, guys, let me know if you have any questions or anything like that, and good luck on your next essay.